Dr. John Sturgis is one of the most decorated theoretical physicists in Medford, Texas history. Exactly what young Sheldon wants you to think. A lovable oddball. The absent-minded professor with the flat effect and the encyclopedia for a brain. A sweet, slightly tragic figure who says the wrong things and means well in the first 2 seasons. But then something happens to John Sturgis that the show buries inside a laugh track, and most people just let it go by. Once you see what actually happens to this man, what the people around him take and never give back, and what it costs him, you realize the John Sturgis story isn't a quirky subplot. It's a slow-motion collapse, and the people he trusted most also slowly destroyed him. Let's start with what John Sturgis actually is when we meet him, not what the show labels him, what he actually is. He is a man who has spent the majority of his adult life in near total social isolation. Not because he's unpleasant, not because he's cruel, because his brain processes the world in a way that makes casual human connection feel like trying to assemble furniture with no instructions in a language you don't speak. He has colleagues, not friends. He has academic recognition, not warmth. He has tenure, not belonging. And then he meets Connie Tucker. Now, the show plays this as a comedy, the eccentric professor and the gambling grandmother, the man who has never bought a woman dinner, and the woman who has seen everything. And there are genuinely funny moments. The first dates, the formal declarations of romantic intent, the way John approaches love like it's a proof he needs to verify step by step before committing to the conclusion. It's charming, it's meant to be charming, but underneath that, if you're actually watching, you see something else. You see a man who has found the first real human warmth of his adult life and has no idea what to do with it except hold on. Connie is the first person who meets John exactly where he is and stays. She doesn't try to fix him. She doesn't flinch at the flat affect or the literal interpretations or the way he announces the end of a social interaction with the same energy you'd use to summarize a board meeting. She finds it funny. She finds him interesting. And for John, being found interesting by someone who has nothing to gain from saying so is, and I don't think this is overstating it, the most important thing that has ever happened to him. He falls completely, totally, with every piece of his limited emotional vocabulary deployed at full capacity. And here's where it starts going wrong. Because Connie Tucker is a complicated person. She's warm, yes. She's funny and sharp, and she genuinely cares about John. But she also has Dale Ballard orbiting her life like a comet that never quite clears the atmosphere. And the show treats this as romantic texture. Will she? Won't she? 2 men, different worlds, Connie in the middle. Classic setup. What it actually is, from John's perspective, is this. The one person who made him feel like a human being instead of a function is perpetually half committed to someone else. And John, whose entire understanding of relationships is built on logic and stated intentions, cannot process ambiguity. He can handle complexity. He cannot handle vagueness. And Connie is, structurally, emotionally vague about what she wants. He stays anyway. Of course he does. Because leaving means going back to before. And before was a very long time to be alone. Now let's talk about Sheldon. Because this is the relationship the show actually builds its mythology around, and it's also the relationship that reveals the most uncomfortable truth about how John gets used. Sheldon Cooper treats John Sturgis as the most important adult in his intellectual life. And he means it. He genuinely means it. When Sheldon says John is the greatest mind he has ever encountered, he's not performing. He's reporting data. For Sheldon, John is the proof that someone can be completely alien to normal human expectations and still be the most valuable person in the room. What Sheldon cannot do, and this is not a criticism, this is just Sheldon's neurological reality, is understand what that relationship costs John. John mentors Sheldon with everything he has. He gives him access, time, intellectual credibility, professional reputation. He advocates for a 9-year-old in rooms full of adults who think the whole thing is embarrassing. He takes Sheldon seriously when nobody else in East Texas is equipped to. He treats him like a colleague when the rest of the world treats him like a punchline. And Sheldon receives all of this the way a very sophisticated machine receives fuel. Gratefully? Yes. But without ever fully understanding that the fuel has a source, and the source has limits, and the limits have feelings. The mental breakdown happens in season 3, and the show is genuinely careful about not sensationalizing it. John checks himself into a psychiatric facility after a sustained episode of what the show carefully doesn't fully name, but codes clearly enough. The pressure, the isolation, the emotional turbulence of trying to maintain a relationship when you are fundamentally not built for emotional turbulence, it accumulates and then it breaks. And here's the part that nobody talks about. What does the Cooper family do? Connie is distressed. She visits. She's sincere about it. But she's also already in the background, letting Dale back into her orbit. Not cruelly. She doesn't set out to hurt John. She just, slowly, makes the calculation that John's mental health is more than she signed up for. And that is a human thing to feel. It's also a devastating thing to do to someone who built his entire emotional scaffolding around you. Mary prays for him, presumably. George is sympathetic in the abstract. Sheldon processes it mostly as an inconvenience to his academic development, then feels guilty about processing it that way, and then mostly moves on. Nobody goes to the facility and says, "You are not alone. You have people." Because the honest answer, the answer the show quietly confirms if you pay attention, is that John Surgis does not have people. He has adjacent people. People who like him, who find him valuable, who would be sad if something happened to him. But the specific, deliberate, show up and stay kind of having people, he doesn't have that. He comes back to Medford after the facility. And this is where it gets genuinely hard to watch if you know what you're looking at. He works at the Dairy Queen, a man with a doctorate in theoretical physics who spent decades producing research that Sheldon Cooper found impressive, who mentored one of the most gifted minds in the history of the franchise, is scooping soft serve in a paper hat, and the show plays it for warmth, for gentle comedy. Look at eccentric John with his new job. Isn't that funny? Isn't that sweet? It's not sweet. It's what happens when a brilliant person has a breakdown and the institutional structure that gave his life meaning doesn't take him back. It's what happens when the only community he built for himself has quietly moved on without making a decision to do so. Nobody rejected John Surgis. They just stopped arranging their lives to include him, and the gap between inclusion and rejection, when you are as socially isolated as John, is not as wide as people want to believe. And Connie ends it. Finally, cleanly, with more kindness than she owed him and less than he needed. She goes back to Dale. Dale is uncomplicated. Dale doesn't have hospitalizations. Dale is not a project. And John, who came back to Medford specifically to try to rebuild the one life he'd built, has to do the math on that. Has to run the calculation where the inputs are everything he gave and the output is a parking lot conversation where the woman he loved explains that she needs something he isn't. He handles it with extraordinary dignity, which somehow makes it worse. Here's the thing about John Surgis that the show almost says out loud and then doesn't. He is what Sheldon Cooper was on track to become. The parallel is structural, not accidental. Genius IQ, profound social difficulty, emotional language that has to be translated through logic before it can be expressed, deep capacity for attachment that nobody around them fully registers, because it doesn't look like attachment is supposed to look. The difference, the only real difference, is that Sheldon found Amy Farrah Fowler, someone who speaks his language natively. Someone who is not a project or a charity or a person being patient, a peer, an equal, a person whose brain runs on the same operating system. John never found that person. He came close, once, with Connie, but Connie's brain doesn't run on John's operating system. She translated for a long time because she loved him. And then she stopped because translation is exhausting and Dale was right. There. So Sheldon gets the Nobel Prize and the wife and the family and the legacy. And John Sturgis gets the Dairy Queen and the parking lot and the quiet drive out of Medford that the show doesn't even give him a proper goodbye scene for. He just leaves. A man who changed the intellectual trajectory of arguably the most celebrated scientist in the show's universe, who gave years of his most productive life to mentoring a child who would go on to win physics' highest honor, who showed up consistently in the particular way that John Sturgis could show up, which was awkward and literal and occasionally tone-deaf and completely sincere. He just leaves. And nobody in Medford makes a speech about it. In Sheldon's Nobel acceptance speech, he thanks his family. He thanks Amy. He thanks Raj and Howard and Leonard. He thanks Georgie in a text message acknowledgement that the show frames as an emotional moment. John Sturgis is not mentioned. The man who first told a 9-year-old in East Texas that his mind was extraordinary. The man who fought for him in faculty meetings. The man who gave him the first proof that a brain like Sheldon's could belong somewhere, not mentioned. And maybe Sheldon forgot. Maybe he meant to. Maybe in the chaos of winning the most important award in science, a name slipped through. His brain does that sometimes with things that aren't physics. Or maybe John Sturgis spent his whole life being the most important person in rooms that didn't know it. And the end of his story in this franchise is entirely consistent with the whole of it. He mattered enormously to a boy who became great, to a woman who chose differently, to a family that liked him, appreciated him, used what he had to give, and moved forward when he stopped being useful. And he knew. That's the part that finishes me every time I think about it. John Sturgis is not naive. He is one of the most analytically precise human beings in the show. He can run the data on his own life. He can see the inputs and the outputs and what the numbers say about his value to the people around him. He knew exactly what he was to all of them. He just didn't have anywhere else to go. So he stayed and gave everything, and left quietly when the equation no longer balanced. That's not a quirky subplot. That's the loneliest story in the whole franchise, and the laugh track never let you hear it.